No, don't worry. It won't get the best of you. It's not as though 50 years or 30 years or even 6 months of anger are going to erupt out of you and leave you raging uncontrollably. I think some people are afraid of their anger getting out of control, because even that past anger can become a useful tool to start understanding your choices, feelings, and experiences. Today we're going to talk about a very interesting issue that comes up in a lot of people experiencing or who have experienced narcissistic abuse, and that's the fear of being alone. You'd think you'd want to be alone after being with a narcissist, but let's break that one down. And before we go further, please join this channel, subscribe. We'd love for you to be a part of this community. And any of you have a thought about this, drop it in the comments. Despite having been through a narcissistic relationship, do any of you harbor that fear of being alone, and did that keep you stuck in your narcissistic relationship? So let's talk about the fear of being alone. Fear is one of those things that explains a lot about narcissistic relationships. The fear of being alone, interestingly, is a key part of what a survivor of narcissistic abuse goes through. Being in a relationship with a narcissist is such a mind-twisting experience that you stop trusting yourself. In addition, relationships with narcissists can be so controlling that you can slowly lose confidence in your own abilities. Control in relationships with narcissists is something that is an often observed theme. The narcissists themselves are sort of obsessed with control. And their control means that over time, obviously, they have to run the show, and you may get robbed of the opportunity to make decisions in your own life. And there's a whole video in this series on indecision. So at one level, the fear of being alone may reflect some of the sort of dependency that the narcissistic relationship can bring up, and a false sense of inadequacy that without this relationship, you wouldn't be able to take care of yourself. So despite knowing that you are being treated horribly and recognizing the need for a change and wishing that all of this was different, the fear created by years of invalidation, gaslighting, dismissiveness, and just generally being diminished can leave you believing that you cannot function without the narcissist. And that's a rhetoric that the narcissist often shares, that you wouldn't be able to make it without them, and they'll push that in your face. People experiencing narcissistic abuse, although there may be a sense of relief when it's done, of not having to endure their narcissistic abuse anymore, there's also often the fear that after the relationship, you will be alone forever, that you will not be able to find another partner or another companion. And this fear can get magnified in people who believe that as they get older, that they will be less attractive as a partner, less desirable, etc. And that fear can leave some people just staying in their narcissistic relationship, or if they end up leaving, or their narcissistic partner should leave them, they may feel a sense of panic, anxiety, and euphoric recall. I should have never left that relationship. It really wasn't that bad. That kind of thing. If you are from a narcissistic family, the fear of being alone may be pronounced in scapegoats who always felt they were teetering on the edge of being cast out, but also a byproduct of the conditional love that is the narcissistic family. When it is conditional, it stands to reason that if you don't play by the narcissistic family rule book or playbook, they might let you go. They may not literally put you out on the street, but they may withdraw, withhold, and definitely psychologically abandon you. There can be a precarious sense that always floats around when you are in a narcissistic family system. A sense that your narcissistic parents could cast you out at any time. And because you never know exactly what they want or how to be enough, it can be a pattern of narcissistic abuse that trails you into adulthood. This fear of being alone can be something that predates the narcissistic relationship. But in most cases, this fear is exacerbated by the narcissistic relationship, or this fear comes up through you being in a narcissistic relationship. Many people have said to me that they were independent and strong, happy people, and then they got into this relationship, and years of manipulation, control, gaslighting, all of it turned them from a cheerful, self-reliant, independent person into a person who slowly felt more and more dependent on a partner who was unempathic and dismissive. The toxic combination of control, gaslighting, and devaluation can take you into a space in which you start to wonder if you can actually take care of yourself. Because in a narcissistic relationship, they are so good at fooling your friends and families. Not in all cases, but in not a small majority. The idea of leaving a relationship from a narcissist and striking out on your own can also feel potentially isolating and ramp up that fear of being alone, because everyone wonders why you are leaving and don't quite understand it when you tell them it's because of narcissistic abuse or gaslighting. So what do you do if you have this fear of being alone, secondary to narcissistic abuse? First, practice being alone. And that may be difficult because of your living arrangement or your partner's sense of control, and obviously because of the nature of the world these days. But if there's any chance for you to just be alone and see how it feels, then give it a try. But some of this can also sort of be done inside your head. Play it out in your head. What would it be like to come home to an empty house? To eat dinner alone? To watch TV alone? Imagine someday in the future having to go to events alone, sit at a friend's wedding alone, go to a party alone. There may be some feelings of anxiety, but go deeper now. Think about what it would feel like to not be criticized during dinner, or not be invalidated while you watch TV, or having to watch your partner either showing off at the party while they continue to invalidate you, or complaining about the party. Think that part through too. If you can envision that life of some sense of serenity and peace being alone, then you may be able to push back on that fear. And remember, you may not be alone forever. Number 2 is my tried and true favorite. I'm going to suggest therapy. Chip away at the core in therapy of what is fueling your fear of being alone. Years of being in a relationship in which someone is telling you that you are incompetent and who has invalidated and gaslighted you have left you so confused that you start to believe they're true. They're not, but you start to believe what they're doing and saying is true. If your choice is a manipulative relationship or being alone, I'm going to tell you right now, that's a no-brainer. From a mental health perspective, alone is always going to win. Number 3, I want you to consider support groups, online or otherwise, and someday maybe in person, but to bolster support and spend time with other like-minded people. Number 4, I want you to start doing something you enjoy, and ideally it's something that gives you and fills you with meaning and purpose. And this can include hobbies, volunteering, maybe trying to take on some new, maybe even more advanced responsibilities at a job, going to school or going back to school. The greater the sense of efficacy, which is a word, this feeling of, I feel like I can do this, I can accomplish this, that gives you a little more strength to push back on this fear of being alone. In essence, it gives you a resilience. Fear of being alone is something that may have plagued you before, long before this narcissistic relationship. In fact, your fear of being alone may be why you got into the relationship despite all the red flags, and why you stayed in it despite all of the red flags. But it may also be a byproduct of the narcissistic abuse in the relationship. You may have gone from independent to reliant and dependent, simply within the context of this narcissistic relationship. And don't view the end of your narcissistic relationship, or maybe even distancing yourself from your family, as a sentence to always being alone. There's many people out there who believe my friends are more family to me than my family is. There are people out there who say, oh my goodness, I don't think I'm ever going to meet anyone again. I'll never be able to trust again. And lo and behold, they meet that person who compliments them. And they recognize that there's a huge difference between being in a narcissistic relationship and in a loving relationship. But as I said, there's almost a lot of single shaming in our culture. Oh, you're alone. What's wrong with you? There ain't nothing wrong with you. You're good. You are not withering in a narcissistic relationship. That already puts you ahead of the curve for overall. But the fact is that for a lot of people, being alone feels like a failure. It feels like an abandonment. It triggers a lot of old fears. And all of this fear of being alone, very, very much gets magnified within the context of narcissistic abuse. So here's this little narrow topic related to narcissism I'm going to talk about. I bet more than a few of you have encountered this. You're in a narcissistic relationship, and you know it's not going well, and you can even sense the discard is happening, and you're really uncomfortable, but you don't want to let the relationship go because you're afraid of being replaced. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that fear of being replaced by someone new and how it keeps you stuck in a narcissistic relationship. This is a refrain I hear over and over and over again from people who are in narcissistic relationships. They'll say things like, I know this relationship is unhealthy. I know I need to get the hell out of this relationship. I know this relationship is not going to change, but... And then they start on the whole litany of buts. Some of their buts are, I can't afford to leave. Some of the buts are, I don't want to be alone for the rest of my life. But many, many times, the but, as it were, especially when it comes to intimate or close romantic relationships, the but is circling around this fantasy, the fantasy and the fear that the narcissist is going to replace you with somebody new and do it quickly. Or maybe they've already found there's somebody new. And that plays on this terrible fear of being replaced. Now, so many times when people are cheated on by narcissists, they'll wonder, what does this new person have that I don't? So they go right there. If they're cheating on them, they must have something I don't. So then they'll go on the deep dive, right? They'll go look at the social media pictures of the new person, or they'll become a sort of private investigator for the day, and they'll find out that that so-called replacement may not even be particularly attractive, or may not be doing much with their lives, or isn't a particularly interesting person. Like, they ain't all that. It's not like you're being replaced by sort of a person from a cover of a magazine. They may not be successful. Now, obviously, if you were replaced, you may not know this new person, but at the face of it, it may seem like that new person isn't all that. They don't seem that much better. So for so many people who feel like the narcissist has moved on, they ruminate over this question of why am I being replaced? Now, there is something this new person has, though, that you don't have and you'll never have. You know what it is? Brand new narcissistic supply, shiny new validation. You might already be a little bit burned out on them, and narcissists always need novelty. This new person is a person who isn't on to them, a person they can future fake and manipulate and still get away with it because the new person hasn't figured it out. In a logical world, if the narcissist, for example, started to cheat on someone or lie to someone, or just was behaving badly in a relationship, there might be a sigh of relief. Ah, this is great. He's breaking up with me. Now he's someone else's problem. But that's not how it goes. Something very primitive can get triggered in survivors of narcissistic abuse. And despite knowing that your narcissist going on to someone new is basically passing a problem on to someone else, and it's probably, almost I can say definitely, the best thing that could happen to you, those deep wounds you have around feeling replaced around feeling that you were not the one who was chosen, those get activated. I've taken to calling this replacement neurosis. And it's really, really problematic because people who have this strong feeling of replacement anxiety or replacement neurosis can make them much more vulnerable to getting hoovered. And then you get stuck into a narcissistic relationship, or you may stay in an unhealthy narcissistic relationship for longer because you don't want to be replaced. Now, once the narcissist realizes that a partner's fear of being replaced, so the narcissist starts to realize, like, as long as I bring that up, I've got complete control over this person. It really sets up a dangerous precedent that anytime the narcissist feels that their partner is starting to assert themselves, then that narcissist may pull out that subtle threat about the new friend they need to go see, or someone new that they're working with, or putting out those shady likes and comments on social media. And they know when they do that, you just sort of hop to it because you're afraid of being replaced. Listen, you can't control the narcissist, but you can start to get to the core of these replacement fears that you have. These replacement anxieties, these replacement neuroses have roots deep in your childhood. They almost always do. And therapy is often required to really do that deep dive of tying this back to issues that come out of your family of origin. And these may relate to things like triangulation, inconsistency in your parents, unavailability of the parents, sibling issues, siblings being compared to each other, or being from a family of origin where love and regard was so conditional and in which you really believed you could be booted out or no longer loved if you didn't perform the way your parents wanted or provide the validation the parent wanted. This replacement fear can also emanate from being from a family in which one of your parents was unfaithful and left the family to go make a new life with this new person. It can also play on you having earlier family of origin wounds, and then you come into adulthood and you have experiences with infidelity in other relationships. Being replaced is a primal fear. Heck, it can even be that your parents bring home your baby sister or brother and give all their attention to them. Now, please keep in mind that what I'm talking about with replacement is very different from something I've talked about in the past called rejection sensitivity. Remember, I talked about that idea of how hyperreactive people with certain personality patterns, particularly like narcissistic personality patterns or other personality disorders, that when they perceive any form of rejection, they react really, really ragefully and angrily. This is what I'm talking about here is not that. This kind of anxiety, this replacement anxiety, circles very specifically around concerns that someone new is going to come along and replace you in the narcissist's life. And interestingly, although the person, let's say you're glad to lose your narcissist, you're okay with the relationship going away because you know it's not a healthy relationship. It's not about the relationship going away. The bigger issue is someone new coming along and replacing you in your role in that relationship. It's different than rejection sensitivity because this isn't about rejection itself. It's about being replaced. Now, this phenomenon around rejection anxiety, this phenomenon around replacement anxiety or replacement fear is really important to understand because there's a really big risk that the fear of being replaced is so profound that it keeps people in narcissistic relationships much longer than is good for them. So you need to think about this for yourself. If this idea of your fear of being replaced is why you're staying in this relationship, ask yourself why your replacement fear is so pronounced. Because honestly, the next person will endure exactly what you went through, the same gaslighting, the same manipulation. And whether you might have a little bit of schadenfreude about the new person, like kind of getting off on their misery, or just sadness for them, that's the reality. This new person who replaces you is not going to have a nice experience. The more you understand what keeps you stuck in a narcissistic relationship, the better off you're going to be in terms of making decisions. And understanding this dynamic of your fears of being replaced is a really big one. Some people stay in their narcissistic relationship. They know that pretty much as soon as they leave, the narcissist is going to find someone new. But interestingly, they know that the narcissist can't go all engines forward into a new relationship because they still have yours, and they may not want to go through, for example, the headache of a divorce. Some people in those cases will stay in a narcissistic relationship to sort of block the narcissist from going into a new relationship. So there is a sort of kind of a guilty pleasure of, ha ha ha, I'm blocking them from a new life. But you really got to ask yourself, am I cutting off my nose to spite my face because I'm staying in this really unhealthy relationship just because I don't want to deal with my own personal anxieties of being replaced? Nobody can replace you because you're you. But if somebody else wants your really uncomfortable seat at the table with the narcissist, honestly, I'd give it to them and move on into your own bright future. So what we're going to take on today, this sort of really difficult topic, is this idea of staying in a narcissistic relationship because you're afraid about how you will feel when the narcissist dies. So you're already thinking about that time down the road, and you feel stuck in the relationship because of that. When it comes to parental or familial narcissism, one manipulation that arises pretty regularly is that the narcissistic or difficult family member themselves or other family members, whether it's their flying monkeys or enablers or just people who don't get it, will say things to you like, well, you know, you're going to regret cutting everybody out of the family or not talking to us because someday he, she, they, I will die and you'll regret it after we're dead. Yeah, ouch. Yeah, like what do you say to that? Because they're right, they will be dead. Someone's going to die, right? It's the ultimate gambit in narcissistic abuse. Because it's an all or nothing, right? Somebody dies, there's no redo. They're gone. It plays on every fear people in narcissistic relationships have, and it manipulates the core issue of guilt. And the fact is, most people fall for it. Many people out there who've experienced narcissistic abuse in families have really tried to do the hard work. They've set the boundaries. They've tried the gray rock. Some have even gone full on no contact. They have missed weddings, holidays, birthday parties, baby showers, and all kinds of other family gatherings. They may feel much, much better not hearing the usual toxic nonsense, the triangulation, the gaslighting, the manipulation, and the scapegoating. But narcissistic family systems are not going to let you go quietly. If you really think you're going to waltz off into the no contact, happy land, it's not going to happen. They are going to pull you will regret stepping away from this after whoever in the family system they're going to threaten you with is going to die, and you're going to fall for it. So let's break it down. If the narcissist or the person who's your biggest problem in your family system is older than you, for example, a parent or a grandparent, odds are that they are going to die before you. So let's take a minute to talk about regret and what it means. Because if you fall for their manipulations, it means that you are in essence signing up to listen to their usual manipulations and cruelty so you don't feel regret when they die. And in essence, and forgive me because what I'm about to say is harsh, but in essence it's like saying that, well, if I get abused enough in this lifetime, then I will be okay when they finally pass on. That's not good for you. Because it's not like the abuse just goes away. It really gets under your psychological fingernails. Now, all of this is an intensely personal decision. And like I said, we can break it down here so you can at least weigh out possibilities in terms of what might be better decisions for you when they play the death card. First, the narcissism in your family system is not going to change, no matter what, okay? The narcissistic person isn't going to become more sweet when they get older. They often get more mean. They are not going to see the light and apologize. They are not finally going to have empathy and say, oh, I was wrong all the time. You're such a great kid. Narcissistic family systems tend to be about control and about keeping everyone in their place, and the narcissist controlling everyone in their place. So you have to have realistic expectations that if you get hoovered back into the system, that's how it's going to be if you decide to spend time with them. Eyes wide open, gang. Realistic expectations. Secondly, you need to break down what regret means to you. Remember, you spending time with them is not going to yield some sort of miracle. And if you try to share what you hope for or think about them after all these years, they're going to word salad you, gaslight you, and blame you. None of that's going to feel good. Is this family relationship then just time served? You just show up, and what if you serve the time and they die? So what then? You get to walk around telling the world that I was there till the bitter end? Most people aren't going to care. And that's a lot of wasted time being abused. So that takes us back to the realistic expectations part. If you know ahead of time, if you say, listen, I know I'm more afraid, I don't want to regret them. I regret this after they die. If you know it's going to be awful, at least you're prepared for it. It might take a little bit of the sting out of it. Third, it is not healthy for you to be in a narcissistic relationship. It's just not. It's toxic. And I honestly don't care how good you are at gray rock, how good you are at boundaries, or at meditation, or at mindfulness. I don't care. If a person is manipulating you, blaming you, gaslighting you, mocking you, invalidating you, dehumanizing you, and insulting you, I don't care how many mantras you say, it doesn't feel good. It's like saying, if I can just endure this carbon monoxide just a little bit longer, then I won't have any regret. Nah, if you endure the carbon monoxide just a little bit longer, it will kill you. And in a psychological way, these relationships are very similarly taking a toll on you. So I think I've shared this story before. I'm going to share it again because it's in my book, Don't You Know Who I Am? But those of you who aren't readers, I'm going to share it with you. So here's the story, because I think this was an interesting one, where there was a woman, and I'd interviewed her for the book, and I'm just going to give you the condensed version. She had a father. Father was a malignant narcissist, made the family miserable. Her sisters and her mother went no contact a long time ago. That left her. He was older, probably didn't have but a few years left, had taken very bad care of his health, lived by himself in a not very nice apartment, didn't know how to feed himself well. So this woman, every few weeks, would get in her car, drive the couple of hours to his house, prepare some meals, put them in little containers, stick them in the fridge or the freezer, watch a little TV with him, and get out. I said, why'd you do it? Why do you do it? She's like, he's going to die. And she said, you know what? I don't want to deal with the regret. I know who I am. I am a person who's actually quite compassionate, quite empathic, despite what that bastard did to all of us. I'm actually a nice person. And I don't want to be the person who let this guy rot. She's like, I actually don't care what happens to him. I really don't. But while he's alive, at least I know he's eating something. And then when he dies, I'm going to be relieved. So in her particular case, she took that manipulation of he's going to die, you might regret it, which he tried with her. And she instead said, no, I'm not going to, but I'm going to do the right thing while you're alive. What was fascinating about her was she was very matter of fact about how toxic this person was. She'd made her own life. She was very comfortable with the life she had, her life, her partner, her job. She's happy. And everyone around her was like, what are you doing? And she said, no, I know what I'm doing. I didn't speak to her after I interviewed her for the book, so I don't even know if this, it was quite some years ago. So I don't know by now, probably the father has passed on. But she had an internal conversation for herself. She said, I don't do this for my sisters or mother. They don't even care about him. They don't even talk to him. We don't have many other family members. We have some, but I don't even care what they think of me. I don't even care what the world at large thinks of me, whether I went or didn't go. I knew what I needed to do. And she was somebody then who made a choice, not because of manipulation, but because she said, I want to be comfortable in myself and in my own skin when he passes on. And she's like, I listen to books on the audiobooks on the drive. I make some calls. I get down there. I got another friend who lives in the area. I go see her. So it was a fascinating approach to it. And I think her story is an interesting parable about all of this. Now, like I said, I don't know if her dad has passed on or not, but my guess is, based on our interviews, that she's going to be just fine and most likely relieved when the story ends. She made her deal with herself, not with him, not with her family, with herself. And his words and his power over her became irrelevant. She was indifferent. He became irrelevant to her, and she just felt like she wanted to honor how she wanted to function in the world as a human being. That manipulation of the someday I'm going to die manipulation is most toxic when you keep going back into the relationship with the narcissist, thinking that they're right, they're going to die, so I'm going to go in. And now you think the narcissist is going to get it or change their behavior. They won't, and they won't. If you want to hedge your bets against regret and your fear of the discomfort of guilt after this person passes away because you can't bring them back to life, then you can go ahead and log the hours while they're alive and recognize it's going to be the same toxic, abusive nonsense it has always been. You can find new ways of reacting. Ideally, don't react at all. You can come prepared with the usual set of neutral topics I always suggest people to talk about, like the weather. I always tell people, if you're going to do this, make sure you detox on the back end of these encounters. Spend time with healthier friends, do activities you enjoy, take a nap, take a bath, get some exercise, watch a TV show you like, and then maybe have a little bit of self-satisfaction that, try as they might, they can't fully hold it against you that you didn't spend the time, though they'll tell you it wasn't good time and you're not even that interesting and blah, blah, blah. I'm not convinced it's going to feel any better if you did start spending the time with them, but because you're going to get the scars of being exposed to their narcissistic stuff. And you'll also have the regret that I just spent years and years going to Christmas with these people and I got nothing. Because that's what the regret is about, right? Not about what you didn't do, but that your life with these narcissists wasn't what you had hoped. It's a very different kind of regret, right? Spending time with them is not going to change that. Many people get hoovered back into toxic families by the manipulation of the potential regret and guilt that somebody's going to die. It's all predicated, though, that manipulation is predicated on the idea that you can make things right. But right for a narcissist is what works for them. It's not about them finally hearing you. So if you decide to get hoovered in on the basis of this fear of someone dying, or you keep biding your time with them for that reason because you don't want to feel guilty, recognize that it is a choice of sorts that you are making. Guilt is a deeply uncomfortable emotion, and people don't like feeling guilt, so they do things to avoid it, even if those things are uncomfortable and result in living a painful life. For example, showing up at family get-togethers on a regular basis that are full of verbal abuse. You do that to avoid feeling guilt. In that case, you are choosing between feeling guilty or avoiding abuse. Those are not comfortable choices. And no, there is no scenario where you can have both. The tough part about narcissistic relationships is there's no way to have both no guilt and no abuse. Again, these decisions are painfully personal, and the right answer is different for everyone. That said, it's important that you are clear about what is realistic in these situations, so you do not have to keep experiencing the same carousel of disappointment that you have been on, in most cases, since childhood. And as always, I say it in most videos more often than not, and I'm going to always say it, being in therapy or counseling or support groups that understand narcissism and narcissistic abuse, or some other mechanism to work through these complicated emotions of grief, regret, and guilt is essential. Otherwise, this can feel like an impossible journey. And some of you may be thinking, oh, you keep talking about parents and grandparents. What if I'm older and I'm married to a narcissist? I'm 70, I'm 75. Now I finally get it. And this is miserable. And the partner's older than you. And the reason you're not leaving is because you're afraid they'll die and you'll regret it. Everything I just said, it absolutely applies in the same way. It really does come down to time served. But like I said, you've got to do that deep dive to figure out how much of your fear of regret, or how much of your regret is the regret that comes from, I'm afraid I'll feel bad that I didn't spend enough time with the narcissist when they were alive and will regret when they die, as compared to the regret over not having had a normal parent or sibling or grandparent or partner. Those are very different kinds of regrets. And you need to do the deep dive, because you can do all the time served you want. You will never get that sort of deathbed confession from the narcissist in your life. And if you go back to that story I told you, she made a deal with herself, one she was very comfortable with. It's on each of you to figure that out and to understand that this sort of dangling manipulation, you're going to regret this because people are going to die and you're going to be sorry for the rest of your life. That requires some really deep brief work, but it is a pretty classical narcissistic manipulation. Why are survivors of narcissistic abuse afraid of anger? What do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially if you're a survivor. Are you afraid of anger? And if so, why do you think that is? You know, to me, what's so interesting are the kinds of emotions that are considered sort of permissible in survivors of narcissistic abuse. We expect to see sadness, we expect to see anxiety, or even fear. Irritability is on the fence, but anger, that's where things get a little bit tricky. Now, when we look at the list of universal human emotions, anger is right there at the top of the list. It's a normal emotion. Human beings, we get angry when things are unjust, when our rights or the rights of other people we care about are violated. It's a normal emotion, right? Anger, I actually think, is kind of a cool emotion because it can be a real motivator. When we are angry enough, we will often try to change something or say something or do something, right? But somehow, we have sort of a stereotype or a template of what a survivor or someone experiencing narcissistic abuse is supposed to look like. We expect them to look sad, deflated, anxious, worried, depleted. Not angry, though. So why are survivors put off by their own anger? Because let's face it, and I say this as a survivor, lots of us are really angry. Well, first, it's likely because anger is so often conflated with rage. And rage and anger are different things. Rage is the dysregulated step-sibling of anger. Rage is out of control, it tends to be disproportionate, and may even unsettle other people. And rage is often what is observed in narcissistic people. They don't just get angry, they go nuclear. It's very reactive. There's a difference. Secondly, many of us got messages that our anger was unwarranted, especially in childhood if we had narcissistic parents. Remember, narcissistic folks don't like our anger. They feel judged or even shamed by it. It can threaten their sense of domination or their desire for domination and control. But basically, they don't like anyone else's anger. If we do get angry, we're often called dramatic or unhinged or out of control, or we're extra. So our anger has been clipped and shaved away for years. So we feel as though we don't even have the right to express it. As children, if you had a narcissistic parent and you dared to express anger, then you very likely incurred your parents' wrath, shame, and rage. Third, survivors are so confused after the gaslighting and manipulation that they don't even know if their anger is permissible. Many survivors
Again, think, maybe I'm the one who's wrong. Maybe I have no right to feel this way. Maybe this is normal. Maybe this is my fault. So then the anger turns into worry, self-doubt, and self-blame. Fourth, survivors are often scared by their own anger. Let's face it, anger is a sign that something isn't right. And trauma bonding can mean that anger is an uncomfortable emotion that we are not supposed to express. Survivors may be afraid of the many things that I'm talking about, but it's also a sign, the anger is also a sign that this relationship isn't healthy. And that may imply that you need to take some kind of action. And that need to take action can feel uncomfortable and scary to have to do. Let's face it, there tends to be room for only one person's anger in a narcissistic relationship, and it ain't yours. In narcissistic relationships, they hold the emotional thermostat. They set the temperature, and they get to take ownership on all emotion and dictate it, and get to decide which ones you are allowed to have. And as you can guess, anger does not tend to be on that list of permissible emotions. A key to healing is finding a way to be with your anger, to give it permission. If someone does something to piss you off, be pissed. Be with that feeling of anger. Take it apart. Hold it in your hands and ask yourself, what is happening here? Why am I feeling the anger? Name it. Call it anger. Anger doesn't mean you have to leave. It doesn't even mean that you have to express it to the narcissistic person. But by being with the anger, you may actually get out of the trauma-bonded haze for a minute and then reflect on what the issues are that are bringing up the anger. Most survivors of narcissistic abuse learn to silence their anger a long time ago, to turn it into other emotions. Be with your anger and use it to your advantage. And no, don't worry, it won't get the best of you. It's not as though 50 years or 30 years or even 6 months of anger are going to erupt out of you and leave you raging uncontrollably. I think some people are afraid of their anger getting out of control, because even that past anger can become a useful tool to start understanding your choices, feelings, and experiences. All of these emotions, sadness, joy, anger, fear, anxiety, surprise, they're temporary, like all emotions, right? They come and go. The problem is that some of them scare us because of our histories, and we try to bottle them up. And narcissistic people don't want us to have our own emotional world anyhow. Let your anger flow. Let it be a real teacher. Again, you don't need to pronounce it from the rooftops. And honestly, sharing anger with a narcissistic person is going to get you nowhere really, really fast. But be aware of it. Pay attention to it. This is where that work of turning inward and saying, yep, I'm feeling angry. This is my emotion. My emotions are always warranted because they're your emotion. Give yourself this time and space to do that. And then take that as the lesson you need to decide, what do I want to do in this relationship? But I understand anger is a very complex history with so many of us. That anger was such a forbidden state for us to be in since we were small children, that to have it now doesn't make sense. And we also know that sometimes anger can be scary because, whether for reasons of gender or culture or anything, we're taught that it's an unacceptable emotion. All emotions are acceptable. Listen to that anger, because like I said, it can be a real teacher.
So this comes up quite a bit. People send in this question. I've seen this comment. People have brought it up when they've talked to me, which is people saying, you know what I'm getting afraid of? I'm afraid that I'm losing all of my empathy after I've been through a relationship with a narcissist, or I've been hurt by a narcissist, or more than one narcissist. It's a very interesting question, and I'm hoping to bring some clarity to it today. This question, am I going to lose all of my empathy, is something that has come up with so many survivors that I've talked with, worked with, and heard from. Think about it, and many of you understand this, after being so hurt, so burned, and especially if after surviving one narcissistic person like this, or growing up with someone like this, you encounter another and another. Many people are afraid that they will lose their empathy. There is also the more heart-rending question of, what is the point of having empathy? You're going to get played. You're going to get taken advantage of. It's my empathy that got me into this damn mess in the first place. So let's take this apart in a few ways. Let's start by talking about people who are still currently in a narcissistic relationship. You may still be in it because you can't get out, or you're just beginning to think about getting out, but you're scared, or you don't know what to do, or maybe you don't want to get out, and all of these are normal patterns. Remember, probably about a half of people stay in these situations, so it's a normal circumstance. Please don't judge yourself. My goal is to give you the workarounds. These are rough relationships, right? Day in and day out of getting no empathy from another person, and the usual menu of manipulation, gaslighting, invalidation, entitlement, rage, with some passive aggression for dessert. Day after day, you try whatever you can. You try firewalling and gray rocking. You try not taking the bait. But to do that over time, day after day, week after week, year after year, it can mean that you start to feel robotic. The human you, the empathic you want to engage. You want them to understand. You want to be passionate. But the wiser you knows it won't work if you do that. So the robotic you sets in. The problem is that it can be a little difficult to turn off the robotic you, even when you're with other people, not with the narcissist, but when you're with nice people. A lot of this comes down to how central or time-consuming the narcissistic person is in your life. For example, if it's a partner or a spouse or someone you work closely with or a friend you see every day, it may be a very primary central social interaction for you, and as a result, it may start leaving you feeling numb in all of your social interactions. And little by little, you may feel like you're not being sufficiently empathic with anyone. It's as though empathy is a muscle, and you never get to use it very much because you're always living in a gray rock, gray scale kind of a world. You have to be like that, right, with the narcissistic people around you. And emotion and empathy can feel dangerous, and that they're going to make you vulnerable. It's really hard to jump between being a robot and a warm person. And from a survival perspective, sadly, if you're chronically having to defend against the narcissist, the robot often wins. Then there is the aftermath. After you get out of a narcissistic relationship, as we have broken down in other videos, getting out of one of these relationships can feel like mortal combat. You can feel ruined by the entire experience and have lost your faith in humanity, love, and empathy. You may feel jaded and ask yourself, why should I be nice to anyone? I get it. Anyone who's been through it gets it. And then people get scared and wonder, maybe I'm no longer empathic. Oh no, if I'm not that empathic, maybe that means I'm the narcissist now. And people really go down that rabbit hole. It doesn't work that way. Interestingly, we do know that in the aftermath of trauma, people may actually experience a bit of a flattening of their emotion, a sort of emotional numbness. That's not necessarily a loss of empathy. It's almost like a sort of a disconnect from the emotion, and that disconnect almost serves a protective function in the fallout of trauma. But obviously, it's not a healthy or viable long-term strategy, and it's something that would need to be addressed in trauma therapy if that was the case. But the fact is, empathy doesn't just disappear. If you've got it, you've got it. But I think of it as a bunch of stuff in a very messy closet. If you really had to go full robot, because you're in such a narcissistic world, your empathy wasn't getting appreciated. So it's like it got buried under some stuff. And now you don't even know how to wear the empathy now that you've dug it out of that messy closet, right? Your empathy is there. In fact, survivors of narcissistic abuse retain that empathy in remarkable ways, despite all that they've been through, and really test it. I know people who are going through brutal divorces, horrible family battles, abusive bosses, and they still take the time to check in with the people in their lives, or will remember a difficult situation that someone else is going through. It's because you became so numb in this one relationship. It's easy to start to believe that your empathy has all gone away, because you aren't getting to use it in a key or an impactful relationship in your life. But I promise you it's there. As someone who works every day with survivors who are going through horrific situations, I am so struck on the daily, really, that even in the midst of their pain, they will, in the kindest ways, always ask about me and if I'm doing okay. It's stunning, and it always reminds me that their resilience is what's going to carry them through this. Their empathy, despite all they're coming up against with narcissistic abuse, is a flame that cannot be extinguished, and frankly, it's a privilege to be able to witness it. It can be very challenging to go back and forth from having a loving, empathic moment with someone and then quickly having to pivot and start gray rocking with the narcissist in your life. Most of us get whiplash from switching. So some people find that if they are in a particularly difficult narcissistic relationship, that they will have difficulty being emotionally and empathically available across the board. So they find themselves just getting more and more numb. As you come to understand narcissism, the impact it has on you and on your mental and your physical health, as you get a little better at gray rocking or firewalling or boundary setting, as you do your very best to keep some healthy people in your life, the ones who have plenty of empathy, you will see that your empathy is there, and it really is, as much as it always has been. But you do have to mask it at times to protect yourself. The more time you have to spend each day with exposure to narcissistic abuse, the harder it is to be as emotionally open with that empathy, because you don't get to practice it, and it doesn't always feel safe. But again, I want to reassure you, you don't lose it. Many people have told me that it took them months, sometimes even years, perhaps after a divorce or the death of a significant narcissistic person in their lives, or leaving a job, before they could fully exhale, before they could let their guard down and bring an emotional fullness and a vulnerable empathy to more and more situations in their life. Frankly, it makes sense to be self-protective after you are emotionally and psychologically wounded. But the fear that the empathy is gone and that you are now a monster, it doesn't work that way, and you're not. Many people will say, ugh, I lost my empathy for the narcissist. That's for sure, they'll say that. You didn't really. Your empathy may have transferred over more to a feeling of pity or that they're pathetic, and likely you had empathy for them for a really long time despite all that happened and what they did to you. And honestly, for many survivors, once they can get some distance, either get out of the relationship and get some distance, perhaps even after they go no contact, they will sometimes say about the narcissist in their life, after all this, I just feel sorry for them. And they'll shrug it away. There's still a little empathy there. Empathy doesn't mean that we surrender to someone and listen to their abusive rants. Empathy means that we don't attack a narcissistic person's wounds and vulnerabilities. Even when they do it to us, we don't do it back. We just attempt to set our boundaries or leave the relationship with grace, or survive the relationship with grace. So empathy is, in fact, like a mountain spring that does keep replenishing. Sometimes, and I live here in California, which is drought central, sometimes during a dry spell, it may seem like a trickle, but it's always there. And your empathy, it's like that mountain stream. It's always there. Empathy is like a little bit of a superpower. But like all superpowers, you gotta use it in the right place. Whether it is a kindness to a stranger you see, or reaching out to an old loyal friend, or any of the other good people who are in your life, use your empathy with the people where it benefits both you and them. Flex that muscle. I promise you that the narcissistic relationships in your life will not rob you of all of your empathy. But I understand your fear. And if you have to take on these battles every single day, it can feel like there's very little empathy left. But trust me, like that mountain spring, it's there. Thanks again.